We are live. Tonight, we're basically breaking into the sociology of murder with my human behavior class. Obviously, I'm going to be giving you a few minutes to check in and welcome. Say hello when you come in so I know who's here. And gosh, I'm just so excited tonight. I don't know why, I just am. You know, I'll tell you why. I had a chance to read through your If Death Had a Face papers today, and let me tell you what, I gotta say, for your first time through writing a paper for me, it was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'll tell you what, some of you have come up with such insights on death and murder and victim that I just wish this was a live class, because I think you all would be just in total awe of what I read. Fantastic. Hello, Michelle. Yes, I really enjoyed yours. Everybody, if you want to know, because I know everyone lives for grades. Richard, what's happening? I know that you all, I understand why. Grades are important. They're not that important. You'll see later in life that your character is far more important. Hey, Samantha, Jocelyn, Schwaneezy, boom. I like that. By the way, if I ever see you in real life, you can call me Schwaneezy. I live for it. I love it. I wasn't born Dr. Schwaner. I don't go by Dr. Schwaner. Unless you're trying to belittle me, then I might throw it out there. Other than that, Professor is a cool nickname, right? You call me the Professor. Hey, Juliet, Schwaneezy. I like that. That's what they call me over at Lyme. Stephanie, hello. Michelle, what's happening? Like I was saying, I read through Michelle again. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I read through your papers, and I don't remember who it was, but man, I only gave one B+. Everybody else got an A from what I read, and I think there was one A-. But you know, it's a hard paper to grade. You know, how do you talk about faces of death and really come up with a grade? Roxanne, hey Professor, how are you? Schwaneezy's always good. If you see me around, you can call me Shawn. But I've never been one to talk much about doctor. Falak, what's happening? Because I wasn't born doctor. I mean, people say, well, it's a sign of respect for your accomplishment. It wasn't an accomplishment, okay? It's just like anything else. I showed up every day. I went to my classes. I turned in the papers when they were due, and I did it enough times in a row that when I was done, I had a PhD, right? I did it a few more times, and the next thing you know, I have 4 master's degrees, and yet still, I still don't think of myself as smart. I'm not smart. As a matter of fact, I continue to learn. And I got to tell you, these papers, I have some notes here, but your papers, and they taught me stuff. Hey, Kristen, nice job on your paper, too. You all did, okay? So I'm not trying to point anybody out specifically. But I was very, very pleased, and I read them about 2 hours ago. I took a couple hours and read them, and I was fascinated. And I'm going to share with you some of the findings. Now, we're not going to share some of these findings later as we go through this live stream, and evidently the live stream has been much better today. Don't know why. I don't understand the technology behind this stuff. However, because it's going live, I expect a lot more of you hitting in the comment box. So I'll be asking questions along the way, and hopefully you can give me 1 or 2 words so that I know who I'm talking to, and so I'm not talking alone. I do that a lot. As you see. Melanie, hello. Kristen, you're welcome, Kristen. Okay. Are there any... this Sunday, you have your QEP paper. Your QEP paper 1 is due. And what I'd like for you to do with that one, before I get into any kind of business this evening, is I would like for you to what I'd like for you to do is actually use that structure that I shared with you in that short little 2-minute video. Your papers, Falak, that's a good question. I emailed everybody their syllabus within Blackboard. Hey, Alba, within Blackboard through course messages. So I sent it as an attachment. So if you go into course messages, you'll see an email for you, and that email will have an attachment that has the syllabus. And I can't really talk about what's in this assignment. It's on gun control. But I can tell you this. Please, I'm not allowed to tell you, but I'm going to tell you anyhow. Technically, what we're supposed to do is take these papers so that they can be read by a committee, because it's a part of the QEP program in the Criminal Justice Department. And so I'm not supposed to tell you, but I'm going to tell you. I don't want to know your opinion, okay? Well, hey, Cassandra, what I really want to know is how well can you frame an argument pertaining to gun control, all right? So, you know, the first paragraph, if you notice, you go back to that video, I wrote, you take to start a paper, you take the name of an author, you might say, Gurr, 1968, argued. And that's how you start a paper. It's real simple. You take those three things. The name of an author that you're using to frame your argument, the year they wrote it, and then say the word argued. Schwaner argued. Garcia argued, whomever it is, right? Sanchez argued. And you take that and you just basically say a quick sentence. What did they argue? What's the core, what's the core of their perspective? And then once you've done that, the next sentence has to be a follow-up. Everyone got an A. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to tell you, Falak, is what I'm going to do is the person who got a B+, I'm going to directly send them an email so that we can kind of just talk a little bit about how to make it into an A paper. I don't know if I read yours because I didn't read the ones from the Inside Blackboard. I read the ones that were sent to me on an email. So I'll be getting to those in the next couple days. And I don't think I actually saw yours, so I'll read that over the next couple days, and I'll have your grade down. But I anticipate that they were pretty good. Right? Now the other thing that I want, okay, now if you go look at that short little 2-minute video, what you're going to see is that paragraph that I wrote is actually a very conceptual paragraph. There's no opinion in it. All it is I use some concepts so I can frame an argument. Hey Gina, when was the syllabus? Hold on a second. When was the syllabus sent? Oh, it was sent the Sunday before the semester started, and yes, I did receive yours, and I sent it again last week. So if you go into the course, into the Blackboard course, and you look at course messages, there's an attachment waiting for you. It'll be in there. As long as you were in the class at that time and haven't added since, you definitely have a syllabus waiting for you. So just go check that out in Blackboard, and you can find it. Now, for those of you who may not have had the syllabus, what I need you to do is I need you to go ahead and submit that paper. I'll give you till Thursday evening. It's an easy paper to do. I mean, it's just if death had a face, if murder had a face, if murder victim had a face, and then you go ahead and present something. Oh, by the way, one thing that really helped your papers is that most of you did as I'd asked, and that is you wrote an introduction before you got into the description, and then you wrote a conclusion. So what was really nice for me, Jocelyn, I have to check inside the Blackboard. I don't recall if well, hold on a second. Let me see. I don't think I did yet. If you sent it in Blackboard, I haven't received it yet, so I'll be checking on that, but I didn't get it in an email. But I'll check and I'll let you know soon enough. But when you're writing that paragraph, make it conceptual. Over the weekend, I had you look up a series of terms, and those terms are very conceptual type of terms. So what you want to do is you want to build an argument conceptually right at the beginning. That way, it takes away the opinion and it makes you into an empirical thinker. You know, you might want to take the historical stance on gun control. You might want to take a look at it using the Second Amendment as a structure to frame your argument. You might want to talk about patterns of death related to firearms or whatever you want to do. But what you want to do is you want to frame an argument, and then you want to have your introduction. You put that in bold, right? Then you have your background, which is you put the heading in bold. And how you do the background is up to you. Are you going to do it as a legalistic background, taking a look at the Second Amendment? Are you going to become... Tell you what, baby. Me and this Wi-Fi are going to dance before it's all over with. All right. It says everything is reconnected. Let me just see if this is working. Let me just see. I'm going to experiment again. Okay. So the chat is working again. So we can go ahead and do this. So when we take a look at it, that those cultural norms, those values that we have within that small group has a real impact on the way in which we behave, right? So if you take a look at like smoking marijuana, I know a lot of people in Miami smoke it, right? But frankly, when I was young, I thought it stunk. I didn't want to try that stuff. But what I learned is that most people don't just say, let me just do it. Because you don't have the associations. You can't just say, oh, let me go over here to the refrigerator and pull out a baggie and just start hitting it. You know what I'm saying? So usually it's a group formation. A lot of people don't like the taste of alcohol. So the group influences them to try it. That's why peer pressure and juvenile delinquency is so high. That's why property crime is higher as a juvenile than as an adult, because we influence each other through our idiocultural values. Right? That street gang is the best example. Street gangs are nothing but idiocultures. People will engage in behavior. See, I've known street gang members my whole life, and what I've learned is, what I know for a fact, is that they're very loving, right? They're loyal, they're friends, but man, there's that culture that you better be able to stand up for this group or you will be excommunicated, if not get hurt, right? So that idioculture will certainly shape the way in which we behave on a daily basis. Now, let's take a look at it. Why is this discussion about common sense so important? Well, it's all because of how it shapes perspective. If our common sense is derived from word of mouth, which means our experience with others around us, our idioculture, if it's shaped by the media, which we don't control because the media is designed to produce and pass on knowledge and information, and so if that's external to us and it's producing for us a way of looking at the world, then that shapes our common sense. And then the third form is political ideology. So what happens is we come up with a belief, right? Everyone should have a gun. Maybe that's your belief. Or maybe no one should have a gun. Maybe that's your belief. And what we do is, it's called selective attention, selective perception. Because there's so much information that it's shooting at us constantly, we can't process all that information. I can't process that I have this microphone over here, this light is on, these blinds are shut, the refrigerator's running, the clock is running, I got this screen behind me, bedroom back over here, master house over there. What's my ex doing? What are my children doing? What's on TV right now? I can't process all that information at one time. Similarly, if I'm watching the news or I'm in a conversation with other people, I can't process all the information that's around me. Between body language and language, it's impossible. So what we do is we come up with a belief, right? And we actively seek out information that reinforces that belief. The reason is real simple. Is because we spend our entire life doing one thing, right? We try to make congruent our sense of self with our identity. So our self is how we imagine other people see us. That's what the self is. Identity is how we approach the way we see ourselves, right? So if we try to align ourself with our identity, the more aligned those are, the better our quality of life, right? Because it's not going to be broken, it's not going to be ambiguous. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to align those two types of things. Well, here's what happens. Once you develop, I love Trump, or I hate Trump, you no longer look at information that could support the other side of it, right? So we actively seek out those things that reinforce what we already believe. We find persons that are similar in our belief system, and what happens is that belief becomes our ideology, and then that becomes the boundary that divides us. Okay, why is this all important? Because hate isn't something that exists in and of itself. Hate is something that is developed and is built around boundaries. So if we construct ideological boundaries, common sense boundaries, and we selectively pull out information that reinforces what we already believe, we do it so we don't have cognitive dissonance. Right? Because cognitive dissonance is this experience where the world as you understand it is challenged. And changing your belief makes you reevaluate the way in which you think. Nobody wants to do that. So if you notice, here's the reason why I know that we protect ourselves against cognitive dissonance. Because I know for me this is a fact. I don't know if it is for you. But so often, have you noticed that if you get into a conversation about religion, it almost always ends up being an argument at the end. Why is that? Because it's cognitive dissonance. You're taking a position that is different than mine. I worked my whole life to come up with this belief, and now you're telling me you're wrong? Are you crazy? You must be out of your mind. So what do? We say, and we have an argument. The other one is politics, right? Here's my political beliefs. You're coming in with data and information that is going to challenge the way I see the world. You're wrong, right? So what happens is we get into these arguments based upon that, protecting ourselves from cognitive dissonance. In other words, what we're really doing is we're protecting our identity. When it comes to homicide, this is critically important because most homicides are not people killing people on the street. That's that happens. Felony homicide like robbery and all that stuff. But the number one form, if you take out unknowns, right? We're going to eliminate unknowns for the moment. If you take a look at why do people get killed, the number one group of people who gets killed are people getting killed by their friends, acquaintances. That's it. And what happens? My identity gets challenged by you. You insult my intelligence, and I have to stand up for who I am. You throw in a little bit of alcohol, by the way. I noticed that nobody put down alcohol when they thought about murder and the face of murder, right? But what we know for a fact is 50% of all homicides that take place with alcohol in the system of the offender and or the victim. Half of them. And the majority of these homicides are men. So one person did put down male as the face of homicide, but they didn't put down male as the face of victim. They put down female as the face of victim, which is a common sense assumption, because what really happens when it comes to homicide, it's usually men killing men. When masculine identity, when masculine subculture emerges and there's a competition over identity. And when there's by the way, victim precipitated homicide is one of the main ways in which people get killed. That is, the victim actively participated in the situational cues that led to their own demise. They got in an argument, it escalated. Next thing you know, there's a challenge of identity. Boom, what happens? Done. Someone pulls a gun and the other person dies. Right? Okay. What does that mean? What that means is we hold on so tightly to our beliefs because we are trained and we selectively perceive that our common sense is correct. And it probably is. It allows us to adapt to familiar environments. Here's the problem. I'm going to get a little preachy. I guess I always get preachy. Yeah, whatever. Here's the problem with common sense. And I'm going to come back to class here in a second. As long as you hold on to common sense and you don't question it and you follow it like a lemming, right? You just follow whatever is going on in your brain and you never question it. The beliefs that you have right now started to inculcate 20, 25 years ago, depending on your age. You were socialized by your parents and other people around you for the next 25 years, 20, 25 years, however old you are. And the beginning of your belief system started in a different era. That common sense that you've learned over time is going to be challenged significantly by the changing labor market. As artificial intelligence takes over and robotics takes over and a digitized economy, a surveillance society, as this digital footprint, as we do these what they call the coronavirus markers, the tracing, as these different technologies overlap, the common sense that you developed over the last 20 years isn't going to fit into the new economy, right? The new system. So you're going to be challenged in the way you think. My belief is common sense is okay for adapting to people around you, but you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to learn to question things. So as the world changes, you can identify methods by which you can fit in, right? So you're fitting into the system and adapting to the system, especially as an entrepreneur, is really going to be your greatest strength moving forward. You have both the greatest challenges and the greatest opportunities ever in human history. I don't know if I'd rather be you or not, but I know that you are who you are. Allow your common sense to be questioned, and you question it yourself. You go through a personal inventory often. And the reason you do that is because as this world changes, okay, homicide is really an expression of alienation and anger, right? As the world changes, your common sense, when it doesn't fit in, your frustration, your depressions, the way in which you get angry about life chances and things as you get older, these kind of things are really a result that your common sense doesn't fit into the change in the world, right? So if you want to understand why other people kill other people, if you can understand that your emotions and who you are as a person is tied to institutional change, then you can also understand that that person who pulls that trigger is responding to institutional change. Then you would see that we're more similar than we are different. I don't know. Does that make sense? Let me see if your chat's working. Can somebody say, yeah, that makes sense? Or no, I have a question about that. While I'm thinking about it, just for a second while I'm thinking about it, while I'm waiting for your responses. The other thing that I want you to do this week is I would like for you to watch the movie Freedom Riders, right? And it is spelled, it's with, Hilary Swank. All right, I want you to watch the movie Freedom Riders. and we're going to use that for next week as we move forward. The other thing I want to do next week is I would like for you to read through, you're supposed to be through, by next week, the second or third section of Dear Mama. I want you to start to formulate some questions that I can answer as it pertains to human behavior and violence. All right? So we're going to start doing that next week. But I want you to watch the movie Freedom Riders. And in Blackboard, I'm going to make an announcement as to what I want you to do with it. All right? But it's a fantastic movie. You can either buy it or rent it on YouTube. That's how I got it. I bought it on YouTube because I showed it in all my human behavior classes. And if you haven't seen it, it's a fantastic movie. But what I want you to do while you watch it, don't just watch the movie. I mean, that's a waste of time. What I want you to do instead is I want you to think about what are the conditions, what are those institutional forces that shape the way in which human behavior takes place, right? How does violence emerge based upon an individual's relationship to those institutions, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, I would give you all the criminology theories to look up. That's ridiculous, overkill. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to give you 10 or 12 of the most important criminology theories to look up for the beginning of next week. Watch the movie, and I want you to apply those theories to the movie. Just practice it. And it's going to come in handy for your exam, and it's going to come in handy for when you go to do the term paper. So the application is important. The reason I want you to apply the theory to the movie is because the only way you can ever learn to question your own common sense is to take a look at it as a theory. Well, if you want to understand, or if you want to be strategic in how you place your life into the changing system, you have to have a theory as to how it works. Because without a theory, life is just going to blow you around. Okay? So my advisor, Len Jordan, used to say at Denison University, he said, Shawn, my boy, he was from Louisiana, he said, Shawn, my boy, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. I'm like, yeah, that's probably true. If you do know where you're going, only a few will take you there. I'm like, it's pretty interesting. Well, if you don't have a strategy, a theoretical strategy for your life moving forward, this institutional change is going to be greater than you. There's nothing you can do. You didn't create the capitalist system, but it sure does shape the way you live. You didn't create Christianity, but it sure does shape, if you're Christian, the way you live. You didn't create this education system, but it shapes you. So institutions are always shaping you. As they change, your ability to adapt is what's going to separate you out from the other 95% of the population. So, using a theory to apply to the movie allows you to learn how to think about data or your life in a different way. So what I want you to do is I'm going to have you look up these theories along the way, and then we're going to move forward from there. All right? I hope that makes sense. Now, last time when we got together, and I hope you're enjoying class. I don't go the full 3 hours. Can you imagine live streaming for 3 hours? Oh my God. Actually, I could do it. Because you see, I can talk. I don't have a problem with that. But I think you'd be bored out of your mind. Well, I don't know if you'd be bored out of your mind or not. But that's a long time to sit there in front of a computer and not be able to move around. But in any case, last time I said to list for me last week 3 crimes that come to mind. And typically, 92% of the people will put down murder as one of their 3 crimes that they think of. And why is that? Because our common sense points us to murder. The problem with that is that murder is the least frequently occurring index of 1 offense, right? So, if the most frequent occurring index 1 offense is larceny theft, that means it has greater value. So why then is our mind not thinking of the crime that has the greatest value? Why do we think of the one that is least likely to happen? It's exciting. Well, it's on TV all the time. Exactly. It's a part of our common sense conception of what crime looks like. And then we take a look at one of the assumptions that are made, right? A lot of you like crime shows. I know for a fact. Where's my book? Where's my book? What did I do with my book? Oh, it's over here. So here's my other book. This is one I usually use in this class. It's called A Mother Cries, Lethal Violence in the Real Zombie Apocalypse. But I knew in this short period of time we wouldn't be able to get them ordered and delivered quickly enough, right? And it's really about murder and suicide and things like that, which is actually it's a really good book. But in any case, it's at Kendall Hunt if you did want to purchase it. But we have these assumptions that we make about violence, and usually it's grounded in what the media tells us to look at. So, when we take a look at why do we think of homicide first, the reason is simply because that's all we're bombarded with. we should be thinking about the number one crime committed in America, according to the Uniform Crime Report, is all other. We don't even know what that is, but that is the most frequently occurring crime. Number 2 is drugs and alcohol offenses, right? Number 3, number 1, larceny, theft, as far as index 1 offenses, but murder's really low. The only one lower than murder in the index is arson, right? So we shouldn't be thinking about murder at all, but we do, right? And the question is, why is that? Well, it's because it's common sense. And what we do is we construct these assumptions about who killers are and then who the victims are without ever really knowing what is the trigger behind the victimization, what is the trigger behind the murder. And if we realize that the number 1 category of homicide are friends getting into arguments, then that would completely change the way in which we look at homicide, right? Because then homicide becomes an expression of our inability to communicate effectively in conflict management. The number 1 solution to violent crime is conflict management. It's not removing or putting guns on the street or whatever. It is, how do we communicate with one another, right? And then if within people who know each other, the number 2 is husbands killing their wives, right? So why is it then when we think of homicide, we think of strangers killing strangers, right? Well, that does happen. I mean, it's pretty frequent. But the number 1 and 2 categories are friends killing friends and husbands killing wives, right? There's a process there, and the question is, what is the process? And here's the other thing. Now I'm getting going, man. Our common sense says, and it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong. However, we spend $2 trillion a year fighting the war on terror, right? And if you go look it up in the Uniform Crime Report, here's what we would find about terrorism. And I'm glad we have, I'm glad we fight it, okay? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying anything. But in a given year, roughly 14 people die on American soil from terrorists. 14 for $2 trillion, right? Then we take a look at it, and even if you include 9/11 back in 2001, you divide 3,000 out by 20 years, that's another 150. So let's just say there's 150 people killed every year over the last 20 years through terrorist activity. It's a common sense perception, right? The greatest threat are those persons who are outside. But think about what is terror. Terror is living in fear, right? So if we were going to take a look at who's the most terrorized group in the United States, why are we not looking at children who are under the age of 4 who get murdered by their family and parents? Because in a given year, roughly 360 kids between the ages of 1 and 4 will be murdered by their parents. They won't be killed with a gun, they get killed with their hands. They get shaken to death. They get bludgeoned with blunt objects. They get hit with skillets. They get slammed up against the wall and they get shaken, right? And those kids have no place to communicate. And typically when a child dies at the hands of a parent, they didn't die, it wasn't the first time they've been abused, it's not the first time they've been beaten. Usually it's something that's occurred over time. So when you live in anticipatory terror, and baby, I know about anticipatory terror because I lived in it. My mother, who I loved, oh my gosh, when she passed away, she was best friends. We were best friends together. But she was brutally abused as a child, brutal. I mean, you read the book, you're going to see how brutal it was. It breaks my heart to talk about it. She was beaten every day of her young life. Oh, I don't even want to get into it. You can watch that. If you want to watch the my speech on Black History Month that's on the YouTube channel, check it out. I talk about her abuse. But my grandmother was so viciously abusive to my mother. And the reason she was abusive, all right, I'll just talk about it for a second. My grandmother loved my grandfather so deeply. But my grandfather, how do I say it? My grandfather was a player, okay? He was up in Mansfield, Ohio, and all the women loved him, and trust me, he loved the women. And my grandmother was brokenhearted that, he didn't love her, not the same way. So she turned to prescription drugs and alcohol, and she became a drug addict and an alcoholic. And because of her anger towards my grandfather, Gramps, she took all of her anger out on the kids because the kids were defenseless. So somebody put in their paper that the murder victim is a reflection of power, right? My mother's abuse at the hands of my grandmother was based upon power inequities. And I don't know how she survived it, literally. But my mother, love was stripped from her. And Mama Green taught her how to love, and that's how she ended up loving me, and we became friends and things like that. But every day of my young life, I worried, when was my mom going to murder me? It was simple, because if she was drinking, then it would be explosive. If she got depressed or she was angry, I was always on edge, because all of a sudden I'd be the blame for our poverty and the reason why we were poor and things like that, and the reason why she couldn't find someone to marry, the reason why we were stuck in the east side of Toledo, the reason why we were poor. I got all that brunt along the way, and I was buffered by Mama Green. So one day when I was about 6 years old, I'd been hospitalized. I'd been brutally beaten one day, and I was in the hospital. I'd been beaten unconscious, and I was taken to Mama Green's house. And I stayed with Mama Green at that point for roughly about 6 months, and I wasn't allowed to go home. And every day, when my mom, Mama Green lived up on a hill inside the ghetto on Oakdale Avenue. And my mom and I lived on Utah Street, which is just, I don't know, half a mile away. It wasn't that far away. But for her to go home every day, she had to drive in front of Mama Green's house and go up this hill and then go down by the railroad tracks. And every day I'd wave to her and say, "Hey, Ma, and are you ever going to come visit me?" And I turned back to Mama Green and I was like, why does Mom care? Why doesn't she want to be with me? Why doesn't she want me as her son? This kind of thing. She said, "Well, baby, she loves you. She's just not capable right now of caring." And I said, "What?" She said, "Well, she had a nervous breakdown and stuff like this." And I said, "Oh, okay, nervous breakdown. I don't know what that means, but okay." She had a nervous breakdown. And one day I said, "Ma, can I ask you a question?" Because I'd get beaten just randomly. I mean, it'd be like, one day I came up, I was 2, I was just barely walking. I wasn't talking yet. And I said, "Hey, Ma." I didn't even say, "Hey, Ma," because I couldn't talk, but I tugged on her dress to say hello. She was in her nurse's dress. And she took her hand and backhanded me. I flew across the kitchen, and Mama Green had an exposed pipe underneath her sink, an iron pipe. And I flew under that pipe, and I hit my head on the wall and was knocked unconscious. And the only reason was because I said hello, and I tugged on her dress to give her a hug, and boom, shot across the room, right? So I asked Mama Green one day, I said, "Ma, let me ask you a question. Do you think my mom would have killed me if you weren't in my life?" She said, "Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about it." Because she was just blunt. She said, "Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Yeah, your mom would have killed you at some point." And it's not because she didn't love you. It's because when your mother gets stressed out, she has anger management issues, and she would have, at some point, she would have snapped and shaken you to death, right? I can tell you this. I lived in terror every single day I was at home. The only time I felt free was when I was at Mama Green's house, all right? Because when I went home, Irma Jean and my mom would argue profusely. Oh, my God, it was horrible. They're always arguing about me. They're arguing that my mother shouldn't be dating so many men, and my mother was telling Irma Jean, "Hey, I'm a grown woman, I can do anything I want." Irma Jean fires back, "You're setting a poor example for your son." And my mom fires back, "Hey, given everything I've been through, I deserve to have my life as I want." And they'd be pushing each other, and they'd be yelling. So I'd tune out and I'd watch TV, right? So that I couldn't hear the fighting going on. And every once in a while, you see someone get smushed up against a refrigerator or a wall or what have you, and I'd go outside and play just to get away from it. But I never knew when that explosion was going to be directed towards me. And if you read the book, there's a chapter in there called "The Morning Childhood Died." As a matter of fact, if you go to my other YouTube page, Shawn Schwaner, there's a 40-minute speech where it's called "The Morning Childhood Died." Well, that was the morning, and I won't get into the story right now because we only have about 15 minutes left in class. But I woke up one morning, it was November 1st, 1981, it was the day after Halloween, and my mother tried to kill me that morning. And, at the end of the story, I'm laying in a puddle of blood on the kitchen floor, and I'm trying to decide whether I want to live or die, which is where the book Semicolon comes from. In case you haven't seen my book, it's also on Amazon. It's called Semicolon. It's the follow-up to Dear Mama. So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh God, what am I supposed to do? Should I end myself? My mother doesn't want me. Is life worth living? And I'm laying there like this. I'm like, oh God. I said, call Mama Green, just tell her what happened. So I called Mom. I said, "Hey, Mom, you better come over." She said, "What's wrong, baby?" I said, my mom tried to kill me, and I need you to help me clean this house up." Oh God. So she comes over with her gun. She had a switchblade that she named Blady May, and then she had a gun that she named Black Beauty. So she comes in the house, and Mama Green was about 5'4". She weighed about 220, 230, maybe 240. She falls to the ground and says, "Oh Lord, not my baby. God, help me." And she's got the gun pointed at the ceiling. "I'm going to kill her. I'm going to kill her." I said, "Mom, you can't kill my mother because, You go to prison and she's dead, and, I won't have you, I won't have her. How would I survive? So we clean the house, and my mom comes home, and she's crying. She wants to apologize, but it destroyed our relationship. It took me 10, 15 years. We worked on it, but we finally fixed the damage from what had happened that day. And Mama Green put the gun up to her head, and she goes, Susie, if you ever touch him again, I will kill you. Come on, baby, let's go. So we left. About 6 months later, in the same spot in the kitchen, Irma Jean and my mom are in a battle because I wanted to go bowling and I didn't have a driver's license yet, so I'd asked both of them to give me a ride. Well, why didn't she give you a ride? Why didn't she give you a ride? Why didn't she give you a ride? I said, you know what, I don't need to go bowling. Next thing you know, my mom comes from her boyfriend's house, Irma Jean's downstairs in the house, and they get into this argument. And Irma, she's a large woman. She's leaving, she's cursing at my mom. My mom's been drinking, and as Irma Jean passes by between the stove and the refrigerator, my mom pushes her in the back. Oh, Lord. Whew. You don't do that to the women in my family. Irma Jean spun around with one hand. My mom was 4'10", Jean was 5'4". She picked my mom up. My mom maybe weighed 100 pounds. Irma Jean weighed 350. Put her up against the wall while she's strangling her with her hand. And she takes the other hand and she's strangling her. I try to get her off. I come running across the room. I try to tackle Jean. I just go flying. So I had to go next door to get Whitey, who was a professional baseball player with the Detroit Tigers. I said, Whitey, you got to come over. You got to come over. Irma Jean's trying to kill my mother in the kitchen. So he comes running over. He's in boxers and a tank top T-shirt. No shoes on. He comes running over. He tries to knock Jean off. Jean throws him across the room. He gets up and he's got to tackle her like a linebacker, takes her down. Ends up, my mom survived and we moved out of the house that night. And Irma Jean moved to, as a matter of fact, she started renting the house next door at Whitey's house upstairs. And I'm sitting there thinking about, wow, how complicated is this? And here's what makes it even more complicated. In between time, right, there was a situation in which my future stepfather put his fist right through the living room door because my mom was 2 classes away from getting her college degree at the University of Toledo. And he said, no wife of mine is ever going to have a degree. She's going to cook for me. She's going to work for me. He goes down. She said, I'm going. Boom, I'm in my bedroom. Boom, I hear this fist come through the wall. I'm like, oh, man. And I see the fist in the living room. My mom's like, leave me alone. So I went upstairs to get Irma Jean. Irma Jean comes down with her gun. By now, Kenny's in the house, and he's about ready to smoke my mom. My mom's laying on the couch cowering like this, and here comes his fist, and Irma Jean, click, click, put the gun up to his head and said, if you touch her, I'll kill you right here. Oh, I wasn't going to do it. So I'm sitting here saying, and then I found less about this dude, who was my mom's boyfriend before him. So they decided that to buffer my mother from Kenny, her future husband, they're going to have this former gang member from Detroit come in and speak some sense to him. A guy who abused me. So I'm sitting here looking at this. I'm watching, right? I'm like, my mom tried to kill me. Her ex-boyfriend who molested me is now going to defend her from a guy who just threatened to kill her. And he was stopped by Irma Jean, who put a gun to his head, but then Irma Jean's going to turn around and try to kill my mom. Let me tell you what. That was confusing, baby. But I learned something from it. Here's what I learned. The TV's a lie. The TV is a lie. It creates these common sense assumptions about murder and violence and homicide, when what it really is, if you really want to get down to it, it is how do we talk to ourselves? How do we develop our common sense, and how do we modulate our self-talk? If you want to do something about homicide, here's what you do. You create people, particularly men, how to manage interpersonal conflict. That's how you do it. That's where you start. And you do so that they can pick an alternative line of decision-making. When you learn how to speak to yourself in a different way, you're going to have a direct impact on homicide. So if we take a look at those criminogenic factors that influence the way in which people engage in violent crime, particularly homicide. Let's take a look at poverty, and we take a look at economic inequality, which those are predictors, right? But when we take a look statistically, it is men killing men. 92% of the people who pull the trigger are men. 85% of the people who the trigger is pulled on are men. But yet and still, we don't take a look at what is it about men and masculinity that leads to violent outbursts. Instead, we want to use these common sense assumptions, these stereotypes as to what a murderer looks like, and then we try to deal with that from a different perspective. It doesn't have to do with the gun. It does. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to get into that discussion. But what it has to do with is, what I'm always interested in is not so much the gun. I want to know, what is the thought process that is going through somebody's head when they say, it is time for me to pull this trigger, right? What is it at that point in time that they're saying to themselves, it is better for me to end their life than for me to walk away or for me to find another alternative line of discussion? What is it about my masculine identity that I think that I have to stand up to somebody else in a violent way so that I can go ahead and smooth out this relationship? That's what I want to know. Why is it those people who rob each other, we're talking about robbery now, felony-related homicide, well, why is it most of those men too? What is it about male competition for scarce resources and this language of violence that permeates? Why are we looking at the language of how men talk internally? You want to know why? I'll tell you why. Because when we look at the news, if we look at this as a masculinity issue, then we got to change the way in which our criminal justice system works. We got to change the way in which the education institution works. We got to change the way in which the economic system operates. Okay? To do that would require a massive change. It is easier to wait for somebody to commit the crime and put them in prison to spend the money to change the system as it is. So when we talk about terrorism, why are we protecting those 360 kids every year? Why don't we take one half of those $2 trillion and put $1 trillion into the education system, teaching people how to talk to themselves differently, and modulating this, utilizing conflict management classes? Why don't we do that, right? Because we can protect those, and by protecting those young kids through conflict management, we're protecting one another, right? Why not? Because common sense says that the people who are a threat are the strangers, who are poor, who are disproportionately minority, right? And as long as we look at it that way, instead of looking at it as an empirical pattern, we're going to continue to maintain the issues that we have, right? Now, sorry about going into all that stuff. All I'm saying is that there is a common sense perception as to what violence looks like, all right? And therefore, there's a common sense perception as to what the solution is. Now watch this. I love what you wrote. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of read, I don't know how to do this. I'm always backwards in the camera. I'm going to take your answers from your paper, and I'm just going to read them, all right? Because they were fascinating. And Steffi Remus, man, you wrote something. I'm going to keep this sentence. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Everything is ending, but nothing is over. If death had a face, her concluding sentence was, everything is ending, but nothing is over. Woo! Man, I don't even know what to do with that one, baby. I don't know who you are, but I like that one a lot. So, when we take a look at death, right, here's some of the answers you put down. It varies. It's got two faces. I love that. I love the idea of dichotomy. It's pleasant. It's agonizing. It's unexpected. It's female. It's angelic. It's angelic and it's calming, which I found fascinating, that whole line of thought. It's unknown. It's haunting. It's cultural. It's fearful. So you can see there's a dichotomy here, a cultural dichotomy, because our dichotomy in society is based on rationality, irrational, common sense, uncommon sense, yin, yang. We have all these dichotomies in our society, in our culture, that play themselves out in the way in which we look at death, right? So culture is shaping the responses that you put down here. My family members, somebody put down, when I see death, I see my family members, the ancestors who have passed on before us. It's controversial. It's a new beginning. It's cruel. It's welcoming. If looks could kill, and then somebody put down the cultural icon for death, which is a Grim Reaper. Someone said illusion, mythical, cultural, multiple, depression, anger, sick, unhappy. Unfortunately, I can't read my own writing. It's dark. And here's one. It's got red skin with horns. I was like, man, that's satanic, baby. That's satanic. So I'm looking at these answers, and I see how culture is seeping into our response. Now watch this. Hold on. I'm about to get going, baby. Dang, okay, I'm going to go. Don't even worry about it. We're going to keep flowing. If murder had a face, oh God, you all had me all lit up, man. I was all happy this afternoon. Murder had a face. Wicked. A bad decision. Reflection of the victim. I love a couple of you had this mirror image of the victim and the offender, which makes sense given the fact that people who typically kill somebody that they know, unless it's a felony homicide. In that case, it's done for economic purposes. It's either economic purposes or it's for social purposes built around anger. But anyhow, back to it. It's devilish and ugly. It's pale. It's got black hair. This is the one I circled. Psychotic, right? It's unethical. Whoever wrote this, I can't remember who you are. This was A+ response, by the way. It's ethical and it's against the social contract of humanity. Woo! Man, that was hot. Okay, then we had here, it's a community of hate and anger. It's young, it's hateful. It's without remorse, in other words, sociopathic. So now we got psychotic and sociopathic. Now we're looking at this as a psychological state. Let me keep going. It's convoluted. It's based upon power, which we already talked about, power over situation. Selfish. Is no, I can't even remember, there's no valid excuse. It's a black shadow. And I'm thinking of the shadow, or you don't know the shadow. I'm thinking of Darth Vader, people like that, right? It's got dark images, it's misleading, it's fear, it's angry, it's male, someone put that down. It's a black hole. What? So it's dark, right? It's psychotic, sociopathic. Now watch this. Hold on, baby. Here we go. When we think of murder, we tend to think of it in psychological terms. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. When we think of murder, we tend to think of murder in psychological terms. Why is that important? Because we like to think of the murderer as crazy. The guy goes up to the 32nd floor in Las Vegas and shoots 500 people, killing however many he killed, 60. We want to think he's crazy, right? We don't want to think that the institution shifted so that those persons who live on the margin are dislodged from society and they experience anomie in everyday life. That's not what we want to think about. We want to think they got to be crazy. They have to be crazy because no one else would do that, right? And the more that we think of murderers as psychologically imbalanced and crazy, the more distant they become from us as individuals. So what we're really doing by looking at the TV show Criminal Mind, right? Next 48 hours. And if you watch any movie or TV shows, they're always trying to get into what's going on in the mind of a killer, right? Like serial killers. Why are they so interesting and fascinating for people to study? It's simple. Because we want to know what made Jeffrey Dahmer eat his victims. That's what we want to know. Well, Jeffrey Dahmer was a cultural creature. The reason he ate his victims was simply because he loved them and he didn't have a method to dispose of them any other way. And his belief was when he ate his victims that the nutrients in the brick, I know it's gross, okay, I'm not trying to say anything, but he believed that if he ate them, the nutrients would live with him forever. So his love, which is, I know, morbid and bizarre and all that kind of stuff, but it was still shaped within love, right? And with love being a cultural phenomenon. But the more we see homicide as psychotic and sociopathic, the more we see it as an individual problem. And if it's an individual problem, then we don't have to take a look at how did the institutions shape the context in which homicide took place. Now, I almost always talk about homicide. I don't talk about robbery and sexual assault and things like that because homicide is the most accurately recorded behavior that we have, most accurately recorded crime. So we want to study homicide because it's a reflection of all those institutions and the context in which anger takes place and the context in which people use violence for survival during felony murder, right? So when we're taking a look at homicide, we're taking a look at the reflection of the society in which we live. We're taking a look at the reflection of culture in which we live. And if we look at it from an individual psychological perspective, we miss out on the impact of institutions, economic inequality. Let's put it this way. If you think back to that video that I did for you, where you have the institutions at the top and that you're at the bottom. Imagine this. Imagine that your access to the economic institution is blocked. Imagine that your access to the education institution is blocked. Religion allows you to accept your position. The family institution is blocked, right? Then you take a look at the criminal justice institution has targeted you as the problem, and then the media sends out messages that you are the problem. So all your access into society and the opportunity structures are blocked. Imagine having them all blocked. right? If every avenue that you were pursuing was blocked, there's a possibility you might feel angry. There's a possibility you might feel a sense of alienation. And there is a possibility that you have a present orientation in which if somebody challenges the only thing you have, which is your identity, and you come from a masculine, a hyper-masculine background, it is your job to protect your identity, right? Or your neighborhood, or your colors, or your zip code, right? They don't belong to you, but you protect them as if they are part of your identity, right? If we always look at things as a psychological perspective, then we miss the fact that there are real structural constraints that shape the way in which people operate, right? And that's what I got by looking at your papers. I see how your answers are still based upon common sense, but from a cultural perspective, right? Predominantly psychological, right? Okay, so let's take a look at chair's all stuck in a groove. All right, here we go. Nose is all itchy. Means I'm going to kiss a fool, right? If your nose itches, you're going to kiss a fool. If your palm itches, it means you're coming into money. My palm never itches, but my nose always does. I don't know. All right, well, don't worry about that for now. All right, so here we go. The victim. The victim. Oh, this is beautiful. It's not beautiful. I don't think murder is beautiful at all. All right, so don't misconstrue. However, the answers are really telling. The emotion, right? The victim. They're fighting it. They're in pain. They got puppy dog eyes, right? Pity. They're fear, distressed. George Floyd, right? Which is really represented in media. If it wasn't on the media, you never heard of George Floyd, right? I mean, last year in Miami, 51 people got murdered in Miami. 10 people, by the way, got murdered in Florida City. So Florida City had a homicide rate that was 85 per 100,000. I know it because I'm doing it in the book. 85 per 100,000. The national average is 5.4 per 100,000. Homestead, I think, is 5.8 per 100,000, so it's not as violent as people think it is. Miami dropped to 9.1 per 100,000 last year, which means Miami is safer than it has been since 1967. Bet you didn't know that, did you? Because we think of Miami as dangerous. But Florida City, 85 per 100,000. That is 21 times more dangerous than the national average. Now, it was 8 in 2016. It was 16 in 2017, but it exploded. So what we'd have to look at, did all of a sudden all these people go crazy in Florida City? Or is there something about the employment structure, the poverty structure, the labor market, the education system, the nature of, because most of those were men, the nature of interpersonal relationships and communication skills? Or was it because these people down here all of a sudden going crazy in Florida City? My thought is probably the fact that there are structural... did you know 47% of the people who live in Florida City, 47% live in poverty? Unemployment rate is something like 26%. When, and I'm not talking about coronavirus, before that, the national unemployment rate was 3.9 per 100,000, or 3.9%, but in Florida City it's 26%, right? You don't think that these people want to feed themselves and their family, do you? You don't think that there's a little bit of frustration and anger out there, do you? You don't think that there's a societal response, an anomic response to these conditions, where people will see people much like themselves as the enemy, rather than taking a look at how the institutional system has created this condition. So if Shawn Schwaner and Clarence get into an argument, and we did one time way back in 1978, and all of a sudden you're the enemy because you didn't pay me back my $5, and I'm going to end your life over $5, maybe we should be taking a look at why aren't we getting paid more in Florida City, right? 36% of the labor force in Florida City works in restaurant and food distribution. Well, the average income, is $11, $12 at most? So if you take a look at the average income of Florida City of $23,000 a year versus the national average for a household, $63,000 a year for the household, well, it's 1/3 of what it is in the United States. And you don't think that there's going to be some kind of force that's going to release through alienation? Of course there is. But if we look at it as an individual problem, then we try to come up with solutions to the individuality of it, guess what happens? We're going to come up with policies that are going to be ineffective. And we do it all the time. We come up with policies based upon individual psychosis, and what happens is, by not taking a look at education, taking a look at family structure, taking a look at the feminization of poverty, not blaming women, but blaming the pattern that those persons who are in poverty are overwhelmingly in single female-headed households. We don't take a look at the education system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We don't look at individual entrepreneurship. We don't take a look at the underground economy and how it grabs certain people and holds them in there. We don't take a look at the language system that people use when they talk to themselves or they talk to others, and you think we're going to solve crime? You must be out of your mind. It's not going to happen, right? Why? Our common sense won't let it happen. Okay, let's get back to it. Okay, so here we go. What else did you say about the victim? They're a wanderer, they're unfulfilled, mercy. Now here's what I like. I don't remember who did this one. It's either a lamb or a lion. Murder victim, lamb or a lion. They're either innocent sheep or they participated in their own homicide. They're lions. I don't remember who wrote that, but that was really good, right? So, in other words, and here's what I really like about that answer. What that answer suggests is, and this is absolutely right, every homicide occurs within a context. Happens within a social context, except for premeditated murder or, hiring a professional hit. You take that stuff out of here. Most people do not wake up on the morning in which they killed somebody saying, you know what, today's it. I'm going to kill someone today. I'm just in that kind of mood, baby. So let me see. I'll just randomly pick out number 37. I hate that number. No, my favorite number is 32. So the 32nd person I see today, gone. It doesn't work that way, right? Homicide, see, we like to think of it as random. It can happen anywhere, everywhere. That's not true. There's a distribution of where a homicide happens. Yeah, it could happen anywhere, but it happens in hot spots. Majority of the murders take place at the hands of a handful of people, chronic offenders, which we'll talk about later, in a small handful of neighborhoods, hot spots. You put a chronic offender in a hot spot and then put in the conflict, that's where you're going to have your homicides. So yeah, it could happen anywhere, right, because there's anger and violent explosion, but there are patterns behind it. And when we think in terms of psychology and we think in terms of randomness, then we think that there's not a pattern when there is. And if we understand the nature of the pattern, then we can start to direct resources to do something about the homicide. By the way, when you direct the resources towards doing something about homicide, something miraculous happens, and that's this: robberies go down, strange-related rape goes down, burglary goes down, arson goes down, auto theft goes down. When we target solutions to that based upon broader mechanisms than common sense, we have a broad-based impact on all of crime, right? And people live in their neighborhoods much more with a higher quality of life. If they turned off the TV and they got off of social media and didn't use the social media for their sense of news and information and the people around them, and they used a little bit of empirical questioning, then they'd live in less fear as well, right? But with what's going on in the media, the sense of fear and division is starting to emerge and is starting to grow and is starting to rise. Here are the last few responses for murder victim. They're saddened, nothingness. That blew my head, right? Blew my head right off my shoulders. Nothingness, murder victim, nothingness. Ooh, distraught, anxiety, distress, shot or stabbed, right? So common sense says that homicide is based upon either being shot with a weapon or stabbed. And that's true and that's not true. It's the nature of the relationship between the people that will determine the type of weapon that is used. If it's two adults in public, they're going to shoot. But if it's a parent who kills a child, they're going to bludgeon them, right? So there won't be any weapons. So when we take a look at the distribution of homicide, the nature of its expression is going to be based upon life cycle, where people are in their life cycle. It's going to be based upon the nature of the relationship of the person that they're with, and it's going to be based upon age. So it's not just guns, it's not just firearms, it's the nature of the context. And that's why that lion thing is so important. It's the context that determines the methodology by which that violent expression takes place. It's always all your behavior happens in context. The people you love is in context. The people you hate is in context. When people smoke dope, it's in context. When they take coke, it's in context. When they kill each other, when they hurt each other, it's in context. As a matter of fact, simple assault is on the, what they call it, the spectrum to homicide. By the way, one last thing. Most people aren't going to get killed. Most of you I hope never have to experience that. The opening to my book, I just rattle off 15 people I knew who got murdered, right? I just rattle it off. Well, you don't have to die physically to die, right? If you're in a relationship where somebody extracts from you your spirit, when somebody extracts from you your soul, when somebody extracts from you love, and when somebody makes you think badly about yourself, right? That is a figurative type of murder. When your personhood is destroyed, then getting you back is the quest that I want you to follow. If you're in a domestic situation, you turn to me. I will help you get out. Because a lot of times we don't know where to turn. If you know somebody who is being battered or what have you, and it doesn't have to be physical. It can be verbal, it can be psychological, it can be emotional. If you need a place to turn, you turn. Come to me. I'm not worried about it. I've seen all of this. I went through it. I lived through it. So you're not alone. If you know people out there who want to end their own life, come to me. Man, baby, I'm here for you. I'm not here. I'm here for me, but I'm here for you. I want you to have a fulfilled life. I want my kids to have a fulfilled life. And I will tell any of you, you can't be fulfilled and you can't be you can't manifest your greatness if somebody in your life is allowed to hurt you in any of those ways, shapes, or forms. Because when I ask you, and I haven't asked you, I do it in other classes, if I ask you to list for me, I used to have people write a poem, think of violence, and then they write a poem about it. And what it always came down to is our perception of violence, violation, is always interpersonal forms of physical violence. We don't think in terms of psychological, symbolic, emotional forms of violence. And the one that never comes up is institutional violation. How do the institutions engage in violence, right? When we take a look at it from an institutional level, which is you don't have access to health care, you don't have access to employment, when, some police, not all of them, we can talk about distribution of excessive force at another time, but when you have all these different forms of institutions riding down on you, that's a violation. I think it's a complete violation that our food chain is whacked out because the major agribusinesses want to put hormones in our food system. Do we know what the long-term effect of that's going to be? Do we know what the long-term effect of us drinking Coca-Cola is going to be on our internal system? But yet and still they can do it unabated without any concern about right or wrong. In other words, institutional violation is something that we could also look at in terms of violence. Let me summarize everything. We covered a lot of stuff today. Common sense shapes the way we see the world. But our adherence to common sense, by definition, locks us into a world that may be damaging to us. Right? It shapes our perception of homicide, it shapes our perception of crime, and it also leads us away from possible solutions. But ultimately what it does is when we rely upon these common sense conceptions of violence, what it really means is that our perception of the world is shaped by media, shaped by the people we know, and is shaped by our experience. And we no longer question it. And if we don't learn to question, our existence within the system, within the social system is going to carry us wherever it decides. If you want to control your destiny, if you want to live a fulfilled life, if you want to be the greatness that sits inside of you inside this classroom, this virtual classroom, if you want to find your personal greatness, you're going to learn to question your common sense. You're going to learn to say that you are great. And you're going to learn to let those people go that are in your life, that exploit you, that hurt you, and don't believe in you. Once you start doing that, and you read that sign every day, I like you, I love you, and you're worthy of your dreams, boom! Now you're on the path to greatness. That's why it's important to understand the relationship between common sense, culture, society, and homicide. Because you, just like them, are shaped by the same structural forces. Woo! I'm not lying. If I had to teach this way for 3 hours, I'd be passed out over here on the floor. I'd be laid out, man. I'd be like, man, you guys, you gotta take over because I gotta take a nap. This takes a lot of energy. Do any of you have any questions that I can answer? Let me just sit here for a couple seconds. Do any of you have any questions about the material, the papers, or anything of that nature? I wish we could meet. As a matter of fact, one thing I'm doing in my other classes, I would love to meet you all. And I'm thinking I'm going to make some changes with the assignments because it's way too much for you to do in a 5-week period. 2 major assignments in 5 weeks. What I'm thinking about doing is having one exam where it's you and me on a Zoom, or maybe 4 or 5 of us on a Zoom, and we just have a conversation about the course content. So rather than having a term paper or final exam, we just have a little discussion so we can see each other. And I'm kind of thinking about doing something like that. But I'll let you know. I'll keep you apprised on the board. But I'm focused this week on finishing this book. I've written 30-some pages in the last 2 days. I'm going to write another 25 tonight, so I'll be at page 50. I'll have 100 done by Friday. And all I do is use that video that I gave you. Brainstorm, then I put in a diagram, then I structure it, and I make an outline, and I write to the outline. Any questions? If not, check out Freedom Riders this week. Your gun control paper is due on Sunday. I'll put some kind of, watching the movie is going to be for our second class period of the week. But what I'll do is I'll probably make a couple announcements, a couple small videos along the way, just to help guide you through. I hope you're loving the class. I'm loving you. And I'm going to be signing out. Are we good? The chat doesn't work. You all have a great week. I'll see you next week.